The tray shook in my hands the moment Ambassador Vren turned his eyes toward it. I had exactly one job that evening: serve dinner to the most important visitor our planet had ever hosted, and do not, under any circumstances, make him angry. The fate of a trade agreement worth more than every human treasury combined was sitting on that table between us, and I was the fool holding the tray. My name is Daniel Ashworth, and 3 hours earlier I had been an ordinary chef working in a government kitchen nobody cared about. Now I stood in the grand hall of the Meridian Embassy, my hands trembling, while a creature from a star system 400 light-years away stared at my food like it had personally insulted him. Vren was tall, taller than any human I had ever stood next to, with skin the color of pale steel, and eyes that shifted shade depending on his mood. Right now they were a flat, unimpressed gray. "This," he said, gesturing at the plate in front of him, "is what you call a meal." It was not a question. It was an accusation. On the plate sat a simple dish: roasted vegetables, a piece of seasoned bread, and a small portion of grilled meat with a light glaze. Nothing fancy, nothing dangerous, just food, the kind humans had been eating for thousands of years. "Yes, Ambassador," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "It's a traditional dish from my region." Vren leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and looked around the room at the other diplomats and officials watching him. Every human in that hall was holding their breath. Every alien delegate beside him seemed to be waiting for a verdict. "My species," Vren said slowly, like he was lecturing a child, "moved beyond this kind of primitive consumption centuries ago. We do not chase flavor. We do not indulge cravings. We consume what our bodies require, in the exact measurements our bodies require, and nothing more. It is efficient. It is disciplined. It is frankly superior." A quiet murmur passed through the room. I saw Ambassador Whitfield, the head of our delegation, shift uncomfortably in her seat near the far end of the table. This dinner was supposed to be a gesture of goodwill before tomorrow's negotiations. If Vren walked away insulted, we might lose everything. I did not back down. "With respect, sir," I said, "food is not just fuel where I come from. It is culture. It is history. It is the reason my grandmother's kitchen smelled like cinnamon every winter morning. I am not asking you to abandon your beliefs. I am only asking you to taste it before you judge it." Vren's eyes narrowed, the gray shifting toward a deeper shade, something closer to curiosity mixed with irritation. "You dare instruct me?" "I'm not instructing you," I said. "I'm inviting you." The room went completely silent. I could hear the soft hum of the embassy's climate system, the quiet clink of someone setting down a glass. Ambassador Whitfield's eyes were wide, silently begging me to stop talking, before I destroyed everything we had worked toward. Vren stared at me for a long moment, then, to my shock, he laughed. It was a strange sound, more like a series of clicks than an actual laugh, but the meaning was clear. "Very well, cook," he said. "I will taste your primitive meal. Not because I believe it will change anything, but because I find your confidence amusing. Perhaps I will even permit others to witness your failure." He picked up the strange metal utensil the embassy staff had prepared for him, something between a fork and a small claw, and cut off the tiniest possible piece of the meat. He held it up, examined it under the light like it was a specimen in a laboratory, and then, with visible reluctance, placed it in his mouth. For a second, nothing happened. Vren chewed slowly, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on some distant point across the room. Then his eyes went wide. It was subtle at first, a slight twitch near his temple, a pause in his breathing. His grip on the utensil tightened just slightly. The other alien delegates at the table noticed it too, glancing at each other with confused expressions. "Ambassador?" one of them asked in their own clicking language, translated softly through the small device on the table. "Is something wrong?" Vren did not answer right away. He swallowed, sat completely still for a moment, and then, very slowly, looked down at the small piece of bread on his plate. "What?" he said quietly. "Was in that?" "Just seasoning," I said. "Salt, pepper, a little garlic, some herbs from the garden behind the kitchen. Nothing unusual." "Nothing unusual," he repeated, almost to himself. He picked up the bread. "I want to be clear about what happened next, because it is the kind of thing that sounds unbelievable unless you were standing in that room." Vren took a bite of the bread, and something changed in his entire posture. His shoulders, which had been rigid and proper the entire evening, dropped slightly. His breathing slowed. For just a moment his eyes closed. When he opened them again, he looked almost confused, like he had experienced something his body did not have a category for. "This bread," he said, "it is not simply fuel." "No, sir," I said. "It's not." He took another bite, faster this time, and then reached for the vegetables. He tried one, then another, his movements growing quicker with each attempt. The other alien delegates were now openly staring, some leaning forward in their seats, whispering to each other in their own language. 5 minutes ago, this man had called our food primitive. Now he was eating like he had been starving his entire life, and had only just discovered what food could actually be. The texture, he muttered, almost to himself, cutting another piece of meat. The layers of taste. This is not simple fuel. This is... He paused, searching for the word. This is an experience. Ambassador Whitfield leaned toward me, whispering, "What did you do?" "I gave him dinner," I whispered back, unable to hide a small smile. Vren finished the meat entirely, then reached for the vegetables again, and then, to everyone's surprise, gestured toward the kitchen staff standing near the wall. "More," he said. "I require more of this." The staff looked at Ambassador Whitfield, unsure whether to laugh or panic. She gave a small nod, and within minutes, a second plate was brought out. Vren ate that one just as quickly, his composure completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like joy. One of the other delegates, a smaller alien named Sethis with pale blue skin, leaned toward Vren and asked something in their language. The translation device on the table picked it up. "Ambassador, is this wise? You have always said such indulgence weakens discipline." Vren did not answer immediately. He set down his utensil, wiped his mouth with the cloth provided, and took a long breath. "I do not know," he admitted, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "I have eaten the same nutrient formula every day of my life. It has kept me alive, kept me healthy, kept me exactly as efficient as our doctrine demands. I have never once, in over 60 years, felt what I just felt eating that bread." He looked at me directly, his eyes now a soft shade of blue, something I had not seen from him all evening. "What was that feeling, Cook?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, without sounding like I was mocking him or bragging. "I think," I said slowly, "that's what we call pleasure, not just satisfaction, not just meeting a requirement, actual enjoyment. Humans built entire traditions around it, holidays, celebrations, family gatherings. Some of our best memories happen around a table just like this one." Vren was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his empty plate. "My species abandoned this centuries ago," he finally said. "We decided that chasing flavor was a weakness left over from our primitive past, something that made us inefficient, unpredictable, driven by cravings instead of logic. We engineered it out of our diet entirely. Every meal I have ever eaten was designed purely for survival, nothing more." "And how did that feel?" I asked. He looked up at me, and for the first time all evening, I saw something like sadness in his expression. "I never thought to ask," he said, "until now." The room stayed quiet for a moment, the weight of that sentence settling over everyone present. Even Ambassador Whitfield, who had spent the entire dinner terrified of a diplomatic disaster, looked genuinely moved. Vren straightened in his seat, composing himself, though his eyes still held that unfamiliar softness. "Tell me," he said, "is this common? This intensity of experience around something as simple as a meal?" "It's not simple to us," I said. "Every culture on our planet has its own food, its own recipes passed down through generations. My grandmother taught me how to make that bread when I was 7 years old. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. It's not just nutrition, it's memory, it's identity." Vren absorbed this in silence, his fingers tapping slowly against the edge of the table. "We have data on human culture, of course," he said. "Reports, studies, observations from orbit and from limited contact. But data cannot replicate this." He gestured toward the now empty plates in front of him. "I have read 1,000 reports about human cuisine being a significant cultural factor. I dismissed it as sentiment, as inefficiency dressed up in tradition. I was wrong." Sethis, the smaller alien delegate, spoke up again, his voice tinged with something between concern and fascination. "Ambassador, if this experience is so powerful, why would your species intentionally remove it? Why choose blandness over this?" Vren turned to his colleague, and for the first time that evening, I saw genuine uncertainty on his face. "Because pleasure was seen as dangerous," he said. "A species driven by craving is a species that can be manipulated, distracted, weakened. We valued discipline above all else. We built an empire on the idea that emotion clouds judgment, and judgment must remain clear at all costs." "And has it worked?" I asked, genuinely curious now, forgetting for a moment that I was just a cook standing in a room full of diplomats. "Has removing pleasure made your people stronger?" Vren considered the question carefully before answering. "We are efficient," he said. "We are disciplined. We have expanded across dozens of systems, built structures that will outlast stars. But I have also seen the reports on human resilience. Your species faces disaster after disaster, and yet you rebuild. You lose everything, and yet you sing songs about it. You suffer, and yet you find joy in a simple meal shared with strangers. He paused. I always assumed that was a contradiction. A flaw in your design. Now I wonder if it is something else entirely. Like what? Ambassador Whitfield asked quietly, leaning forward. Vren looked at each of us in turn, then finally settled his gaze back on me. Strength, he said simply. A species that finds joy even in hardship does not simply survive circumstances. It fights for something worth surviving for. My people have optimized ourselves for endurance, but perhaps, in doing so, we removed the very thing that makes endurance meaningful. The room stayed silent for a long moment. I had not expected a dinner to turn into something this profound, but standing there, watching a man from another world reconsider decades of belief over a piece of bread, I understood that this was more important than any negotiation happening tomorrow. Vren cleared his throat, straightening his posture once more, though the sharp arrogance from earlier in the evening was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful. I would like to request something, he said, looking directly at me. Anything, Ambassador, I said. Teach me, he said, not just this recipe, though I would like that as well. Teach me about this concept, flavor, pleasure, tradition. I want to understand what my species left behind, and I want to bring that understanding home with me. I glanced at Ambassador Whitfield, who gave me the smallest nod of approval, still looking slightly stunned by how the evening had unfolded. I'd be honored, I said. Vren nodded, then looked down at the empty plates in front of him, a faint expression crossing his face that almost looked like embarrassment. I believe I owe you an apology as well, he said. I called your food primitive before I understood it. I judged your culture through the lens of my own doctrine, without ever truly experiencing what I was judging. That was a mistake. It happens to everyone, I said. We all judge things we don't understand yet. What matters is being willing to change your mind once you do. Vren actually smiled at that, a strange expression on his alien face, but a genuine one. Your species has a way of turning simple wisdom into something profound, he said. Perhaps that too comes from this pleasure, this joy you speak of. Perhaps a mind that knows how to enjoy also knows how to reflect. The rest of the dinner passed in a way none of us had expected. What began as a tense diplomatic obligation turned into something closer to a genuine conversation between two very different peoples. Vren asked question after question about human food, about festivals, about the strange human habit of associating certain meals with certain memories. He was fascinated to learn that different regions of our planet had entirely different cuisines, different spices, different traditions, all shaped by history, geography, and culture. At one point, Sethis leaned over to me and asked quietly, "Is it true that humans sometimes cry at meals, out of happiness?" I smiled at the question. Sometimes, yes. Especially at gatherings where family comes together after a long time apart. Food has a way of bringing people back to a certain place, a certain memory. Sethis seemed genuinely moved by this idea, murmuring something to Vren in their own language, something the translation device did not pick up clearly, but Vren responded with a small nod, as if agreeing with whatever had been said. As the evening wound down and the plates were finally cleared away, Vren stood from his seat and extended a hand toward me, a gesture our staff had taught the delegation earlier that week as a human sign of respect. I shook it, feeling oddly proud of how the evening had turned out. Tomorrow, Vren said, we begin negotiations on trade and cooperation between our peoples. I suspect those talks will go smoothly, given tonight's events. I hope so, Ambassador, I said. There is something else, he added, his tone growing more serious. I intend to bring a sample of your cuisine back to my homeworld, along with a full report on what I experienced tonight. I believe my people need to reconsider certain assumptions we have held for a very long time. Perhaps discipline and joy are not opposites after all. Perhaps the strongest societies are the ones that manage to hold both. Ambassador Whitfield stepped forward at this point, finally finding her voice after watching the entire exchange unfold. Ambassador Vren, she said, on behalf of humanity, I want to thank you for your openness tonight. It means a great deal to us. Vren turned to her and gave a small, respectful bow, a gesture he must have learned from studying our customs. No, he said, thank your cook. He reminded an old and stubborn diplomat that wisdom does not always come from doctrine. Sometimes it comes from a simple meal, shared honestly. As the delegation began to leave the hall, Vren paused at the door and looked back at me one final time. Cook, he said, what is your name? I would like to remember it. and I would like to write it in my report. Daniel, I said. Daniel Ashworth. Daniel Ashworth, he repeated slowly, as if testing the sound of it. I will remember this evening, and I will remember your name. Perhaps history will remember it too. As the night an old man discovered that flavor is not weakness, it is life. With that, he turned and walked out of the hall, his fellow delegates following close behind, already talking excitedly among themselves in their clicking language. I stood there for a long moment after they left, staring at the empty plates on the table, hardly able to believe what had just happened. A few hours ago, I had been terrified of ruining the most important dinner of my life. Now, somehow, I had helped change the mind of a man who represented an entire civilization. Ambassador Whitfield walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. You have no idea what you just did, she said, smiling for the first time all evening. That man has been the most difficult voice in these negotiations for months. Tonight, you did more for this treaty than our entire diplomatic team managed in weeks of formal talks. I just made dinner, I said, still a little stunned. No, she said. You gave him something his own people took away from themselves. You gave him a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, humanity has something worth learning from. I looked back at the empty plates, thinking about my grandmother's kitchen, about the smell of cinnamon on winter mornings, about all the small moments of joy that had shaped my life, without me ever realizing how powerful they truly were. Somewhere out there, across galaxies humans had only begun to explore, there were entire civilizations that had given up something as simple and as profound as the pleasure of a good meal, all in the name of discipline and efficiency. And somehow, on one ordinary evening, in an unassuming embassy hall, that idea had started to change. I thought about what Vren had said, about strength coming not just from endurance, but from having something worth enduring for. Maybe that was the real secret humanity carried with it into the wider universe. Not weapons, not technology, just the simple, stubborn insistence on finding joy, even in the smallest things, even after everything the universe had thrown at us. As I began clearing the last of the plates from the table, I could not help but smile. Somewhere, an alien ambassador who had spent 60 years eating the exact same bland formula was now on his way back to his quarters, already dreaming about the taste of seasoned bread. And somewhere far beyond our sky, an entire civilization was about to learn that sometimes the smallest bite can change everything.